Welcome to the Next Class 2.0 with host Rob Birdsell, Kent Hickey, and Aaron Barisano. Join us as we discuss the latest trends and innovations shaping education.
And we have a very special guest with us today, Jeff Thielman. Jeff, welcome to the Next Class.
Thank you, Rob. It's great to be here.
And to our listeners and viewers, we have a little technical difficulty today, so you might be hearing a little bit of an echo when one of us is not muted, but we're going to try to make this work. To begin with, Jeff Thielman brings in pretty extraordinary background to this conversation today. And I'd like to start, Jeff, in Peru, sort of maybe where it all began. And tell us a little bit about what drew you to Peru, who you met there, and how it changed your life.
Sure. Thanks, Robin. Thanks for inviting me onto the program. This is a real honor, and it's good to see you again. I'll tell you a little bit about the Peru story. It actually all started when I was a senior at Boston College. I graduated from Boston College some time ago, and during my senior year, a lot of my friends were gravitating towards careers in business or to graduate school right away, and I just felt like it just wasn't me. I couldn't quite compete with that. So I started to look at volunteer programs, and the Jesuits had a program in Peru. And I went for 3 years. I went for 2 years with an option for a third. It actually ended up being 4 academic years. My plan had been to go to law school right away after college. But I kept thinking about this desire to go serve people, this need to try to help people. I had been an Appalachia volunteer at Boston College, and I really wanted that experience again. So I went to Peru. I taught at a Jesuit high school. I had to do a project as part of my role at the school with my high school students as a homeroom teacher, and the project ended up becoming what's called the Center for the Working Child, which is still going to this day, called the Cristo Rey Center. And during my time in Peru, my second year in Peru, a new president came to the school that I was working at, and his name was Father John Foley. And we became fast friends, and he was my boss, and he became a great mentor to me, someone who challenged me, who was actually very enthusiastic about the work that I was in charge of, that I had created, the Center for Street Kids. That was called, as I said, the Center for the Working Child. And he was someone I always admired and considered a very good friend.
There's the lovely echo. Sorry about that, listeners. So the Cristo Rey Center for the Working Child, and just a slight tangent, but is that, I know the story of Cristo Rey, but is that how the name started with Cristo Rey? Did you guys bring it back from Peru?
Well, I think the name Cristo Rey for the Cristo Rey schools here in the United States was something that Bradley Schaefer felt strongly about, because Cristo Rey means Christ the King in Spanish. And the purpose of the original Cristo Rey school was to serve young people in a Mexican-American neighborhood, people who spoke Spanish. So that was really the reason for the name of Cristo Rey. In Peru, the school I went to work at in Tacna, Peru in 1985 was called, and is still called, Colegio Cristo Rey, Christ the King School. And that was named by a Jesuit named Father Fred Green, a World War II veteran, also a dear friend and someone I've always admired. And when we started this center, this after-school program for street children, which continues to this day, it's now grown, it's got more programs, it's got programs for adults, it's still there in Tacna, Peru, almost 40 years later. When John Foley came along, he actually said it should have the same name of the school. It should be called Centro Cristo Rey del Niño Trabajador, and now it's just called Centro Cristo Rey. So that name Cristo Rey that name Christ the King, Cristo Rey, has been something that's been associated with my life for 40 years now.
And Jeff, that's interesting. And so if we fast forward a little bit, you come back, you go to law school, you're practicing law in Boston, and I believe you were in Chicago for a visit, and you called up this old friend of yours, Father John Foley. Tell us a little bit about that story.
So the story is this. this is how I remember it. But I was, I graduated from law school. I practiced law for a short time. I had all this law school debt. I said, well, I got to pay this debt off so I can do some good work in the world. So I was actually, at that point in time, working at an insurance company, trying to sell life insurance, disability insurance, and all that good stuff for a great company with great friends. And I got invited to an event the Jesuits had in Chicago, and I went out there and I stayed with John Foley. And by this time, he had returned from Peru, and he was starting Cristo Rey, and he was in the second year of the school. And he showed me the school, and then we took a walk along Lake Michigan. And he said, so what is going on with you? What are you trying to do with your life? And I said, well, I'm selling insurance. I wanted to be a lawyer, but that wasn't working out, and I really want to kind of do some meaningful work. So what I'm doing now is I'm selling insurance, and I'm volunteering, and I'm on a board for a few things. And John Foley famously said to me, what are you doing for the kingdom? Which, as we know, in the Catholic faith means, what are you doing to spread the word of God around the world? What are you doing to help people, to put it in layman's terms? What are you doing to make the world a better place? And that question got me thinking. I thought about it on the walk that night at the Jesuit residence in Pilsen in Chicago, where I was staying. I was thinking about that. And I still think about it, by the way. That question comes to my mind often. What are you doing for the kingdom was John's way of saying, is this really where you're supposed to be, Jeff? I've known you since, for a long time now. I knew you in Peru as a Jesuit volunteer, very happy serving people, serving street kids, teaching kids. Is this what you're called to do? So that got me thinking. That was the famous question. And shortly thereafter, maybe, in a good Jesuit way, he was kind of planning his moves, right? The Jesuits always meet you where you are spiritually, and he found out where I was. And then the next day at breakfast, he asked, would you ever consider coming to work for our school, Cristo Rey Jesuit High School here in Pilsen, as the development director? And he said, you probably won't think about it. And I said, I'll think about it. And then a few weeks later, I accepted and went to work for him. And that changed everything.
Father Foley has a way to do that. I still remember him coming out to our home here in Wilmette, knocking on the door on Sundays. And when are you going to come work for Cristo Rey? When are you going to come do what God's calling you to do? And he wouldn't take no. I remember one point he said, no is just a delayed yes. So let's just get this over with and come downtown and work for me. And Kent, I'll turn to you.
Jeff, I want to get into a little bit about the work that you're doing right now, but let's just stay for a minute on this discernment that you went through. This is something that Rob and I and others at ILE, we talk a lot with people about, and Catholic school leaders have to talk about discernment all the time. And one of our articles, white papers that Rob and I wrote is called Discernment is Disposition, that it's not about the steps so much as the interior. I'm really curious about the story you just described with Father Foley, kind of giving, the Jesus, what are you looking for, kind of thing to the disciples. I'm also, though, really curious that in your senior year of high school, when I guess it was in college, when others were moving toward these areas, what you said is, I knew that wasn't for me. Yeah, I knew it wasn't for me. Do you see any connectivity between those times in your lives where you're making these discernment and what was going on inside you? Could you describe that a little bit?
It's always, for me, it begins with a reflection, like, is this the right thing for me? And then, I'm a proud spiritual guy. I'm a guy that grew up in the Catholic faith and is still a member of the Catholic faith. And I would and I do go to God to figure out, okay, where am I supposed to go? I wouldn't say that I'm a guy, Rob knows this, I'm not a guy who knows every verse in scripture, and I'm also not a guy that believes that, just because I have a faith or my faith is the faith that everyone should practice. I don't ascribe to that at all. But what I do is, when I'm in a moment like this, I just sort of spend time by myself. I think about it, and I think about, what am I really called to do? What is God really calling me to do? So in my senior year of high school, college rather, my senior year of college at Boston College, it was the 80s. My friends were, rightly so, nothing wrong with it. They wanted to make as much money as they could. They were trying to find jobs that paid well. They were trying to get into the workplace, into the work world, and trying to launch their careers. And many of them did, and did great, and had wonderful lives, and are very successful and very happy. I just said to myself one day, when roommates and friends were going to the career center and all the other things that you should do, that I would want my kids to do, by the way, I just felt this is not for me. I got to find another path, man. And I kept reflecting on this week that I had as a sophomore in Appalachia as a volunteer with the Appalachian Volunteer Program that Boston College had. And now hundreds of kids do this every year at BC and other schools. And I felt like, that's really what made me happy. So why don't I go find that? And so I talked to a priest at BC, Giulio Giulietti, and that's how it happened. Fast forward, almost 10 years later, or more than 10 years later, when I was walking with Father Foley by Lake Michigan, same thing. I was trying to look, what else can I do? This is not working. Selling insurance, try to pay off my loans, this dream I had that I could pay all my debts and then do whatever I wanted to do. It just wasn't working. And I John asked the right question, and that night I didn't really sleep that great because I kept thinking about it, and I went home and I kept thinking about it, and I was on the plane and I was thinking about it. John asked a very powerful question. I had to reflect on it, and the more I reflected on it, the more I realized, I wasn't doing enough for the kingdom, and what that really meant was I wasn't happy personally and professionally. I wasn't where I was supposed to be, and I needed to make a move.
That is beautiful. And thank you for sharing that. Rob, you're going to probably remember, like I do, that sounds a lot like Father Frank Matchka, the spiritual guru at Market High that we both knew well. And one of his lines was consistent, like, when you're looking at your call, remember that God wants you to be happy. So that if you're following something and you're miserable, it could very well be that God does not want this for you. So one of the ways to practice discernment is to look at that interior joy that you find in some things and not so much others. I, by the way, am also kind of a recovering attorney. My transition from practicing law to becoming a teacher was I was living in Janesville, Wisconsin, and practicing law there, and I was asked to coach a 7-year-old soccer team. A bunch of 7-year-olds. We were absolutely horrible. I think we lost every game, mostly because of their bad coach. But my point was, when I started to realize that I was enjoying that more than going to the law office, that told me maybe I should look at a career switch back into teaching. So anyway, thank you for sharing that. I wrote that down. What made me happy? Well, you're in a job right now, I hope, that makes you happy because you're doing really significant work. Could you please just share for us and for our listeners, what's the kind of work that you're doing right now, and tie it into what makes you happy as you do this?
So I'm the CEO of an organization called the International Institute of New England, which has offices in Boston and Lowell, Massachusetts, and also in Manchester, New Hampshire. Last year we served 21,000 immigrants and refugees, and we have a staff right now of about 240 people. And we resettle refugees who come from all over the world. That's a program the U.S. government has been running since 1980. We serve people who come into the country for humanitarian reasons. They're called humanitarian parolees, victims of human trafficking, unaccompanied children who cross through the southern border, and immigrants of all different statuses. And so this organization has been around for over 100 years. And I, just to kind of fast forward in my career, I worked for John at Cristo Rey Jesuit High School from 1997 to 2000. In 2001, BJ Casson, who you've had on this podcast, hired me to run his foundation. BJ and I got connected when I was in Peru and I was raising money for the Center for the Working Child. And then we started the Cristo Rey Network. I was one of the co-founders of the Cristo Rey Network, and I oversaw the startup of schools across the country. And then from 2009 to 2015, I ran the Boston school called Cristo Rey Boston High School. That was an 18-year journey with the Cristo Rey schools that began with that walk in Lake Michigan, by Lake Michigan. So I had been with the Cristo Rey schools for 18 years. I was looking for a new opportunity. I was kind of open to whatever would come about. I got a phone call from a recruiter, and this place was looking to someone who could lead it and grow it. And it's incredibly rewarding work. In fact, there was discernment that did get back to faith that I thought a lot about. And that was sort of this whole verse in Scripture, in all over Scripture, by the way, Old Testament and New Testament, about welcoming the stranger. And I thought about that a lot, welcoming the stranger. That's a key part of our faith, and actually lots of faiths, not just our faith, but many faiths. And I thought about that, and that kind of made sense to me. Like, okay, this is the next move. This is the next. Leading an organization that's going to welcome refugees and immigrants to New England is the right move. And also, we happen to live here in this part of the country, New England, that has an aging population and needs to bring people into the country. So our services are resettlement. We have English classes for adults. We had about 1,500 people, adults last year, learning English at different levels. And we have them enrolled now. There's a big waiting list for that program. We do career placement. We place a little over 1,000 people a year, immigrants and refugees in jobs. We have career training programs for people to enter careers in maintenance, construction, and healthcare. And then we have an immigration and legal services program with about 11 staff that help people adjust their status in the country. And we're also working in the shelter system here in Massachusetts, where there's lots of people that are migrants to the area.
Thank you, Jeff. We're going to take a short break to hear from our sponsor, and then we'll be back to hear more about Jeff's work in this critically important role.
Catholic Virtual is a proud sponsor of the Next Class 2.0 and dedicated to supporting Catholic school leaders. Our partner schools turn to us for online teaching solutions that fill teacher openings, expand their catalogs to offer more course choice, and provide options for students an alternative learning experience. Learn more about how we can support you at catholicvirtual.com.
And we're back. Thank you once again, Jeff, for joining us. Some powerful work you've done from your 18 years at Cristo Rey, now for the many years you've been at the Institute. A couple questions for you. It's been I remember when this administration came in the first time and you and I talked, and it was pretty tumultuous. Just talk about maybe the past month or two and the effect it's had not only on your team and your work, but on the immigrants and what they're facing and feeling.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. That's the key question. I would tell you that people are living in immigrant communities across the United States. People are living in fear. So the president has made it clear that he's going to deport anyone who is undocumented. That's 13 million people. He's also talked about deporting or ending temporary protected status for people. So we served last year 16,000 people from Haiti, many of whom now have or are applying for temporary protected status. That's a status you get that allows you to stay in the country while there's danger in your home country. Those folks cannot go back to Haiti. We have people from Venezuela that we're serving. We have literally thousands of people across this region that we have served that now fear deportation, some with good reason and some with not good reason. We're trying to tell people to keep sending your kids to school. We're telling people, we're training people on their rights, what their rights need to be. And, I feel that, and our whole organization feels that this approach to immigration is wrong. And in fact, Pope Francis came out with a letter a few weeks ago that was just beautiful, that just said that, our faith calls us to welcome the stranger. Jesus was a stranger. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, the Holy Family, were refugees. And so we need to have a more humane system of receiving people in this country. You can debate all you want about whether the prior administration managed immigration correctly. Even the Pope in his letter said countries have a right to manage immigration the way they see fit. But terrorizing people, telling people who have done nothing wrong, who are paying taxes, who are working, that you're going to have to leave the country without due process is not within our values. It just isn't. And so it has created a lot of fear. It's also created a lot of anxiety among our staff. And we have now situations in which the administration is pulling back funding, people that we work with. We get some of our funding from the State Department, some of our funding from the Federal Office of Refugee Resettlement, some of our funding from state government, and a lot of our funding, 30% or so, from private sources. And so the approach has created confusion, and as I've said to many people have asked, executive orders are not new laws. They're not, you're not creating policy. And just one more thing on this. What I have learned in 10 years on this job, speaking to a variety of groups. We have offices in New Hampshire. I've been on radio programs in New Hampshire with lots of different callers, with lots of different perspectives. What the American people want, I think what they voted for, is they want an immigration system that is well managed, that is fair, that is well organized, and that ensures that they're okay. That's what they want. That's what they want in the system. And what's frustrating is not only the fear that is being created, but the fact that we're actually not getting any closer to that solution.
Remarkable, and your work is so important. And thank you for that work. A lot of different directions to go with this. I think one of the things that I wrote down. So, I was a theology teacher for a number of years. I love Scripture, but it is remarkable in those stories, particularly in the Old Testament, when the requirements are given about looking out for the alien or whatever. Always there's an introductory comment that says, "Remember that you too were a stranger in a strange land." And I bring that up because we are a good people. I mean, Americans are good people, and our Constitution and our beliefs are so strong and so positive. And most Americans, not all Americans, have had in their history an experience of immigration. And I think that's what was happening in those, in Hebrew Scripture was, don't forget, you were there too. Do you think that there's any hopefulness that you see, even though right now things look awfully dire? Where do you see hope in this?
So I'm always a hopeful person. Here's where I see hope. So in our state, Massachusetts, where I'm sitting right now, 90 different communities had to suddenly receive immigrant families, migrants is what the media called them, people seeking asylum who had come through the United States border legally through a program called humanitarian parole. They came in two ways. One was through a Customs Border and Protection application, or the other was through a program called the Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, Venezuelan program where people sponsored them. And they came to all over the Commonwealth. Some of them didn't have places to stay. Lots of debate as to whether or not Massachusetts' law called the right to shelter was the reason why they came here. But they came here because most of them are from Haiti, and we have the third largest population of people from Haiti outside of Haiti in this country. Largest is Miami, second largest is New York. We're the third largest. People came to be with their family, their friends, and their community, basically. Some of those folks ended up entering our shelter system in Massachusetts, and they were in 90 different communities across the Commonwealth. And in every single community, there was a combination of an outcry, public outcry, like, oh my God, they're in our community, and volunteers going to the hotels from churches, from community groups, school groups, college kids to help the newcomers. So there was this outcry, which went away after a few weeks because people are like, well, they're living their lives. They're not doing any harm. And then there was this welcome. And so what gives me hope is that in every community where I've worked, there is a broad cross-section of the population that says, well, they're here. They need some food. The kids are going to go to school. There's a boy playing on my kid's soccer team or a girl on my kid's soccer team. He's pretty good or he's not so good. He's a good kid. Let's welcome them. And usually that's what happens. The community steps up, and that's what gives me hope. What gives me hope is people everywhere. And just one quick little story. When someone is facing deportation, awful situation, there's a whole process you're supposed to go through for that. I have heard of people who say things like, well, he didn't do anything wrong. His papers expired. I didn't know they were gonna deport my friend. I thought they were just going to deport, somebody who committed a serious crime. And so people are often stunned when they realize that a friend or a neighbor or someone who, waited on them in a restaurant or worked in their business, all of a sudden is facing something awful like deportation. And so one of the things I've learned, that one of the things that gives me hope is that when people hear an actual story of someone who is facing a difficult immigration situation, but is contributing in every way to the community, their mind changes a little bit.
The stories, the humanity, Jeff, absolutely. We need more of those stories. Many of our listeners are leaders in Catholic schools. Could you share with them two things? First, what you think they could be doing from an educational standpoint for their students, and also what they could be doing in terms of service, as you were just talking a little bit about. But how could they take this crisis on in their school from an educational standpoint and then a service standpoint?
Yeah, great question, Rob. I think, first of all, from an educational perspective, I think it is critical right now, given the importance of this issue, given how it colors all of our political discussions in this country, that students get a good knowledge of the history of immigration in the United States. You can build this into a theology class, you can build this into a social studies class, an English class, but it's important to get the progression of immigration in this country. We had a very restrictive immigration law put in place in 1924, the year this place started here, the International Institute in Boston started. And that immigration law had a dramatic impact on our innovation until it was in this country, and our economic growth in this country until it was repealed in 1965. So there's a whole history of immigration that is worth studying. High school students, middle school students should really understand it, and they should. That's part of the educational piece. The other part of the educational piece is to encourage kids through good teaching, obviously, to reflect on their family's immigration history. And I think if you were to go into a class and say, the ninth grade at a Catholic school anywhere in the country, or the 10th grade, whatever, and the kids did that kind of an exercise, they would realize, one, most of them have somebody, a grandparent, a parent, maybe a great-grandparent as far away as that, who immigrated to the United States from somewhere else. That's important to understand. And they're going to meet classmates in their classroom who may be recent immigrants to this country. So that's one thing that Catholic schools should be doing. The other thing is, I think, as a policy matter, and I've seen this, my kids go to a Catholic school here in Massachusetts. They've been very good about saying that, we're going to keep this a safe place. We're not going to, open the doors to ICE unless they have a warrant. We're going to follow the law. It's going to be a safe place for our students and our staff. So that message, I think, is getting out among all schools, public and private, across the country, and that is a very good thing. It's a reassuring thing, certainly to parents who may be in a dangerous situation. In terms of actually getting kids exposed, I'm a big believer in a border trip. If a school can fit it into their budget, I'm telling you that I was on the southern border this summer. I was in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, and then El Paso, Texas. I spent maybe 5 or 6 days down there on both sides of the border, visiting with people on both sides of the border. And there's lots of opportunities to do border trips, and I think that is a powerful thing for a student to reflect on. They may come out of it, with a different political bent than I might have on immigration, but that's okay. The important thing is the exposure. So I really think that understanding the history of immigration, understanding a student's own history of immigration in their family, and understanding the border is absolutely critical right now. And by the way, without any political goal here, some of the students may leave and say, well, we should toughen our immigration laws. Maybe they're right. I don't know. Or maybe they'll think otherwise. It's not about, I want to make it clear, it's not about changing people's political opinions. It's about exposing them to maybe the biggest issue in their lives. One final point when you get into immigration. The world is facing a huge forced migration crisis. That's just a fact. There's 120 million people forcibly displaced around the world. 43 million of them have been classified as refugees by the United Nations. And these folks are looking for a permanent place to live. You see this all over the world. This is the issue, one of the issues that is going to impact the next generation of young people who are going to lead this country. They have to address this issue. It will be forced upon them because of climate change. It will be forced upon them because of war and violence around the world. People will keep coming. They will keep trying to get to the United States, and they're trying to get to the United States at a time when our population isn't growing as fast as it used to among those who are born here, and it's aging. So all of these factors are going to impact our students in all schools across the country, and understanding the reasons for it is critical.
Great answer. I had two thoughts, particularly as it relates to the Catholic schools. Jeff, when I used to do evaluations when I was teaching, students almost always said that I did my most effective teaching when I was showing movies. And so Cabrini, right? I just watched Cabrini. If you you watch Cabrini, you can't draw the parallels today, right? And so get these families, our kids, to watch that. It's so good. But I also was an administrator in these schools, and I really appreciated your comments. Every one of our Catholic schools should have a clear policy statement, grounded in mission, grounded in faith, grounded in words like, remember, you too were a stranger in this land, and determine if they're going to put students and families first or not. And for some of these schools, when they're looking at these decisions, they may have to face the uncomfortable question of, well, what if we lose a donor or two? And that's when they need to decide how important mission is. So these are one of these key times, I think, in our Catholic education history, reflected worldwide. We need really clear policy statements. That's where your values are expressed, right? And so it'd be really, really important. So I'm glad you said that. And you did. You made, and maybe you just follow up on this a little bit here, if you wouldn't mind. But maybe you could share some of the thoughts. I mean, you said, hey, ICE is not going to come in. If you have a warrant, that's different, right? Could you explain that distinction?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So, I think it's a question. Obviously, you want to ground any statement you make to parents and families in the mission, but you also can ground it in the law. And so, first of all, schools records, student records, personnel records are the records of that school district, or that archdiocese or diocese, depending on how the school's set up. And no one has a right to those records under the law. And so the first protocol that schools have is if someone were to come in from ICE, then the first thing you do is obviously you call the superintendent. You go up to the higher level, and somebody comes out and asks, what are you doing here? What are you looking for? If they have a warrant, a signed warrant by a judge with a name on it that specifies why they need to come in and talk to someone, they can enter the school. And so I think it's a question of good training, and it's a question of Catholic school administrators saying, we're going to follow the law. The law requires us to protect student records. We're going to protect our students. We're here to educate kids every day. This school is safe for your children. Please come every day. And we're going to protect them while they're in the school. I think that kind of messaging is absolutely critical. And by the way, Ken, I love Cabrini. In fact, who told me about it? John Foley texted me, said, you got to see this movie. And so the next day, it was from John, so I did what I was told. And I watched that movie, and it was powerful. I love that movie. And for those who don't know, Mother Cabrini was from Italy. She came to the United States, and she helped all these poor Italian immigrants in New York City, and then set up centers all around the world, orphanages and all sorts of things, and hospitals and schools. And she was a fighter for her population, and she believed that in welcoming the stranger. Mother Cabrini believed in welcoming the stranger, and she was fearless. And so I'm not as fearless as she is as a leader of this organization, but she was fearless and is a real inspiration.
Jeff, that's great. And we actually use the movie in our third seminar at Eiley. So we're getting everybody to watch that movie. But Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today on the next class. We end every podcast with the same question. Every guest gets it, and it sounds like you listen to BJ Casson, so you might know what's coming. Who is your greatest teacher, and why?
Well, certainly my greatest teacher, I think, spiritually was always Jesus. I always try to follow that. His example. It's very hard to do in life. I don't think it's pretty hard to do. And then, of course, I had my mother and father were good teachers. I was raised in a family. My mother is a retired teacher now, but she still does some adult teaching. But she is a great teacher. Always my inspiration as a teacher. And in the brief time that I was a teacher, I realized how hard that profession is. and how hard my mom worked. So the greatest teacher for me has always been Jesus, but the teacher in my life is always my mom. And by the way, all the Jesuits that I worked with over the years were incredible teachers because of the way they carried themselves, the way they met the moment, and the way they met you wherever you were in your life journey, and the way they made you think about what you should be doing. So there you have it.
Well, Jeff, not surprising. It is kind of surprising. This is our fifth season, and so we've had dozens of guests. You are only the second one to name Jesus as their best teacher. The first was the president of Red Bank Catholic, Bob. I'm blanking on Bob's last name. Can you remember Bob from Red Bank? That was his comment was Jesus. But so great answers, Jeff. Thank you again for being on such a busy time for you with all that's happening. But I can't think of a more important topic to be talking about and for our schools to be addressing. So to our listeners, thank you for joining us once again on the next class. If you enjoyed this, as always, share it with your family, friends, like it on whatever platform you're listening to us. And we look forward to seeing you soon on the next class.
Thank you for tuning in.